Okay, officially welcome everybody to this month's River Management Roundtable. The title here is River Professionalism You Don't See, and it was meant to be a little bit mysterious. So we'll explain what that is, and we'll welcome Logan. I'm going to introduce her in a second. She's going to tell you a little bit about her work, but she is a reentry community outreach coordinator for Jubilee Housing, and that's here in Washington, D.C. I'm thrilled. She has just moved here. I got to meet her in person last week. And then she also is the past community engagement coordinator for River City Outdoors in St. Louis. So if you're not familiar with the River Management Roundtables, we host these once a month on the second Tuesdays about this time. And they're of one of two types of content areas. One is on the river. We say kind of more operational. We'll talk about permits or use or safety, signage, that kind of thing. And then the others are workplace culture, which is everything about what it's like to work at your place and how to increase the quality or enhance the quality of the community that you work in and with. And if you're not familiar with RMS, we are a membership organization. We are 30 years old as we are configured, but we're really over 50 years old in terms of the community. A couple of groups got together over the course of the years. So we've been around for a long time. And we rely on members to keep going. And a couple of notes, we're recording today. Please, I think we'll have plenty of time for questions. If you have them in the chat, particularly if you can't hear something, put it in the chat, but we'll probably just open it up for questions when we're done with the program. And we ask you to be respectful of others, as you probably always are, but just it's a good reminder. So I'm going to hand it over to Logan, and you can take it away.
Of course. Thank you, Risa. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Logan. As Risa mentioned, I've done a couple things, moved around a bit. Just to start off, a bit about me. I was born and raised in Indiana. Went to school at Purdue University, studied political science and criminology with a handful of some minors. And then I relocated to St. Louis, Missouri with my girlfriend at the time. I started working with this gentleman here on the right, Chris Gedden. He is actually a board member for RMS, which is how I got established and how I got to meet Risa and learn a bit more about RMS. I was the community engagement coordinator at River City Outdoors. So Chris and I were in the community engagement department. If you're unfamiliar with River City Outdoors, it is located in St. Louis, Missouri. It is a nonprofit. The main mission is to help diversify and kind of create better situations within outdoor recreation. So as you know, outdoor recreation can be expensive. There's lots of barriers from transportation to financial, even just social and not having the knowledge of where to go, how to get started. So RCO works to help mitigate that. So they do a lot of youth programming, specifically with school, summer camps, getting children who are located in St. Louis City out on the water, whether that be the one of the larger rivers in the Mississippi and the Missouri, or just at Forest Park, which is a lovely park in the city. If you've ever been or on your way to St. Louis, I highly recommend. In addition, we also had a gear lending library, which is a super cool idea. I'm not sure if any of y'all are familiar, but I managed our gear lending library at River City Outdoors. Essentially just like a normal library, but instead of books, it is outdoor recreation equipment. So In our library, we have tents, backpacking equipment, camping equipment, kitchen stuff, tables, chairs, rain jackets. Um, yeah, you should definitely check it out. rivercityoutdoors.org. They do a lot of cool stuff. They also paddle in very large canoes on the Mississippi and the Missouri River. So they do a lot of paddling, just like RMS. Um, yeah, I was the community engagement coordinator a little over a year. Um, and then I actually moved out of St. Louis, Missouri, and my partner and I, we put all of our stuff into storage, and we actually went traveling for 6 months. So we hopped over to Australia and we saw Australia, New Zealand, and then Southeast Asia. So this photo of me on the right is with my fiance, Nina. This is in Indonesia in at Aegean Crater, which is a sulfuric volcano. And we have these little gas masks around our neck because the crater actually emits sulfur. And there are minor sulfur miners. Our hiking guide that day was actually a sulfur miner who his day job is to wake up before the sun comes up and essentially hikes up this volcanic crater, mines sulfur, and carries it down in multiple pounds, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds. So tourists also make this hike to see there's something called the Blue Fire of Aegean, if you're really interested. We didn't see it that day. We just got to see the gorgeous sunrise and see some of the sulfur. So we have the sulfur masks to protect us in our breathing because it's definitely strong. So yes, that was a super cool experience. We just traveled around and now back in the States, we relocated to Washington, D.C., and now I work at Jubilee Housing as a reentry community outreach coordinator. Still doing outreach and community engagement, which is one of my passions. But now I'm working with individuals who have recently left incarceration, either from a federal prison or the local DC jail, and are in need of support and resources, specifically housing. I help run a transitional housing program and get clients who are in need of housing connected, and also involved in other programs, other resources around the DC and DMV area. So it's lovely to be here in DC and to be so close to Risa as well. That's very lovely. And yeah, that's a bit more about me and how I've gotten involved with previously RCO and of course now Jubilee. When it comes to my relationship to the outdoors, I think we all are here for the love of the outdoors, and that's kind of the cool connection that we all share today. I don't know, it's hard not to love the earth. Big fan. I've always really loved environmental advocacy and kind of standing up for not only, clean water and environmental rights, but also for all the birds and the bees and all the ones who also share this space with us. I am not nearly as big of a paddler as I am a hiker. I love to hike. It's one of the most accessible and entry ways to get into the outdoors. So I love hiking. I like to backpack when it's not tick season, which that season is getting very, very small. And then also paddling, I was introduced to paddling through River City Outdoors. And that was my first time on a SUP, a stand-up paddling board. I did some kayaking and canoeing before, but that definitely gave me a lot more experience. So I don't own any paddling equipment yet. My DC apartment can't handle it. It can barely host and hold all of my camping equipment. But we're definitely excited to find a space here in the DMV area to get out on the water and explore this part of America. as I've mentioned, I have a fiance who also joins me when we go camping and hiking. And I'm here today to talk a bit more about my experience as a queer woman in outdoor recreation and how that kind of resonates also within the workplace and everything in between. So, growing up in the Midwest, I have my had my fair share of working with or in residing with people who don't really know what to do when they interact with someone who is gay or queer or anything kind of out of that ordinary. So being outside, especially at different campgrounds or even on the water, there's definitely been moments that I know people do not want me there. We've shown up to campgrounds in or campsites in Utah. Um, and I had mentioned this to Teresa when we chatted earlier a bit, where we've had people stare us down until, the moment we're setting up our tent and all of our camping equipment until, we're making dinner for ourselves. So there's definitely still lots to do when it comes to how can we create a space for not only outdoor recreation, but also just existing in this space together, knowing that people are still uncomfortable and I'm too what's the word, I don't know, no one's gonna get in between me and a s'more. I guess that's how I'll say that. So but obviously there are people who really that can be very impactful when you notice that there are people around you that don't want you there. So I'm just kind of here today to talk about that and also what it looks like in the workplace. Um, Obviously, these things can happen in and outside of the workplace, and it's important to know kind of just the basics and also how to support your fellow outdoor recreation lovers, your fellow paddlers, fellow campers, and also your colleagues, depending on their backgrounds, their identities. And everything in between. So, moving forward, let's head to the next slide. So I will stay on this slide for as long as requested. Um, I don't want to turn this into any kind of LGBTQ 101 just because I'm not familiar with all of y'all and kind of information that you already have, your background. There's lots that we can all learn and teach each other today. This I wanted to kind of pull up just to kind of provide a very basic intro. I had shown this little graphic, this first one on the right, the gender unicorn, and I've used that in some other trainings that I've facilitated. Just because it's a really nice graphic when it comes to kind of everything LGBTQIA plus. It kind of helps break things down from gender identity to expression to attraction, and kind of helping create different bubbles for, as I mentioned, sexual orientation, but also gender identity, and how those are separate, but also can be very connected and are intertwined. So this is a cool graphic. There's also the gender elephant for those who are wanting more and who appreciate the graphic. That has a similar kind of idea. It helps kind of break down, all the different spectrums, right? You have the gender identity. Myself, I have short hair, skin, I get gendered all the time. And that's just something I live with. I'm fine with it. And I'll talk about that a bit more later. But gender identity, how, I dress, how I cut my hair, and how that impacts how I am viewed in the world and campgrounds. And then also attraction, right? My partner is a woman, happily, and that also impacts, how others can be viewed. So this is just a fun little breakdown. On the left, I have the progress pride flag. So that kind of shows all the rainbows, but it also has the black and brown colors for our people of color and our queer brothers and sisters, and then also the trans community with the blue, pink, and white, and then the intersex community. There's no test on this. I couldn't even name all of the different red, yellow, green, blue, kind of what they represent. So you could really go down the rabbit hole. We're not going to do that today. This I just thought was a cool graphic to kind of show how expansive LGBTQIA really has become. And then of course just some pronouns. That's a really, and I'll talk again more about this. But pronouns can be a huge kind of conversation. They don't need to be. I think they have gotten, especially in the past, they've really become a large part of the conversation. Um, but in reality, pronouns are a part of our daily life. You learn them in third grade English class and you continue using them without even realizing. And when we're working with individuals who have pronouns that you may not be familiar with, like they, them, it's important to be able to know how to use those pronouns and be successful with colleagues, friends, neighbors, or, campground neighbors who do use those. Um, and yeah, before I move on to the next slide and kind of talking more about content and specifically in the workplace, I wanted to kind of um, allow anyone if they have any questions over any of the above or anything that is not in this, but you've just had it for years and you didn't know who to ask. And I'm here and definitely able to answer any questions about any of these or anything else that you may be curious about. So, any questions before I move forward? Beautiful. Well, if anything changes, throw them in the chats or interrupt me. Oh,
Logan, I have not so much a question, but a comment in
yeah.
looking at the gender, all the little gender people there. Um, One thing, tell me um, if this is not normal, but maybe not surprising or not surprising. Sometimes I'm not sure not what she, her means, but
Mm-hmm.
what she, her means. Like not, I'm a she, her, I represent, I refer to myself as a she and a her, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm, I'm not gay and I'm not attracted to women. I'm not attracted to women. So when I see when I see a she, her, I assume that's how they identify. But I think in talking to you, it also means where they're attracted. Yeah.
So, yes. So that's a great clarification. So pronouns have they do not provide any information on attraction. They're simply a
Um,
way to identify yourself. So I also use she, her pronouns. I was assigned, this is really a bit more, but I was assigned female at birth. That is a phrase that you may hear. Sometimes people shorten it to AFAB, assigned female at birth. And that means that what I was assigned at birth is that what I identify. I'm a cisgender woman, and I use she, her, hers pronouns to help me do so. There are people such as myself who use she, her pronouns that are also LGBTQ. However, that has more to do with the attraction versus how I identify. So they're two separate bubbles, but often they do intersect because you have people who are queer who use pronouns, and they may look like they, them, he, him, and that doesn't take away or change their attraction. Does that make sense?
yeah. Yeah. And then this is kind of related. So the one, two, three, fourth person, if I saw somebody who had their hair like in a bob and had makeup on and had some, female type jewelry, were wearing heels and identified as a he, him, it would throw me.
Oh yeah.
It would throw me. And I don't see that type of person. I can't remember the last time I've seen that type person and seen that that person self-identifies as he, him. Is
Hmm.
that unusual, or is I'm just not meeting those people? You
I
think?
mean, I think at the end of the day, there is like no way for us to know um all of the self-identification and the actual like sexuality of people that we come in contact with, right? There are ways to do that, right? So even in your profile, you have the she, her. Um, that has become normalized slightly through Zoom, right? And also just providing pronouns. But if you're walking, if I'm going to take the metro to work, there are thousands of people on a daily or not on a weekly basis that, we come in contact with, and there's no way to kind of know that information. Um, when it is necessary, when you are going to be referring to someone and using their pronouns, and for any kind of way you think that they may identify with a different identification that they were assigned with, right? Then there's a definite, then you can ask, hey, what are your pronouns? I want to identify, or I want to, make sure I'm using your correct pronouns. That happens to me all the time because I have shorter hair. Excuse me, my name's Logan. People get confused, very easily. And I'm happy to say, oh yeah, thanks. My pronouns are she, her. So unless it's a necessity kind of based where you're going to be talking, with this individual, you're going to be working on something, where you're going to need to know, hey, she went to do this, he went to do that, they went to go pick up the mail. I don't know if it doesn't matter as much to have that information. There's, like I said, there's so much information that, all of us hold, whether that be from, where our parents grew up, where their parents grew up, that we don't really need to go along with our information. I'm sure we're curious about it, if that makes sense. But it's not a necessity.
Okay. And then just one more question before going. If I've met you, I mean, I'm meeting you for the first time. I've never met you before. If I don't say my pronouns, do you kind of like say, "Oh my God, it's one of those," or "She's"?
No, I
No?
rarely. That's a great question. No, I don't give any kind of forethought to people who don't provide pronouns, to me. That's something that just doesn't, yeah, if you give them, I will use what pronouns you provide. If you
Right.
don't, then we all assume, right? This is someone, yeah, there are assumptions that are made, and that's just kind of a human experience. However, if someone gives you their pronouns or corrects you and says, oh, hey, I actually use these, then you can move forward with that information and change kind of
Yeah.
how they use that. Yeah, this is not a say like, oh, you should introduce yourself with your pronouns and your name every single time you meet everyone in the world. Not gonna happen. You have
Yeah.
too much stuff to say to waste your time with that. But in moments where you think you may be around people who use different pronouns that you are familiar with, then that gives you a chance to kind of ask politely and say, hey, what are your pronouns? What is your name? This is, my name's Logan, my pronouns are she, her, and that kind of gives the ability and the kind of the avenue where other people can share theirs more comfortably.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd not want to worry about insulting someone that I don't know because I have or haven't, you
Right.
know, shared my pronouns. Okay, let's go. I'm hogging the time here.
No, you're
Okay.
fine.
All right. Okay. Onward.
Speaking of pronouns, let's start. The first thing that I was wanting to kind of start with was the importance of language. It seems, again, really small, but using correct pronouns and chosen names, that's another kind of phrase that has gotten a bit more popular. Not everyone has and uses the name that is on their birth certificate. Some people who are named John go by Johnny. Some people who are their full name is Melissa, goes by Mel. And likewise, there are some people who have changed their name to fit more with how they view themselves and how they feel. So being able to use correct pronouns and correct names and what names people want to be called by is a really important first step. And just, having that basic respect, and also being able to communicate uh, not only properly, but also in a way where It's not going to start any internal conflict with someone else, right? If you're misgendering somebody and consistently, they're not going to want to show up. They're not going to want to continue conversations with you. Just as if someone called me by the wrong name 3, 4 times after meeting them, I don't really have much interest in correcting you after the fourth time. So even if it's not with people who have different names on their birth certificates, but it also includes, nicknames, as I mentioned. Um, when I worked at River City Outdoors, and even now, but specific a lot of times when we were doing camps with summer kids or summer camps and working with kids who couldn't be, I don't know, first, second, third, fourth, all the way up to eighth grade. All the time, I would introduce myself. Hi, my name's Logan. I'll be leading the hike today. All the little ones, very quickly. Are you a girl? Are you a boy? Are you a girl? All the time. I get it all the time. Even I bartend on the side. And I had a kid last week ask me if I was a boy or girl, and I was like, damn, I cannot get away from this. Wherever I go, this is what happens, right? And that's again something I know even because adults, so I'll interact with adults and they see my name, they see my short hair, but then they still kind of get confused, right? So it's just kind of, and I say that example to show that kids will ask you in the way adults won't, right? Kids, if you work with kids, you know that they'll ask you all wild questions, and I'll say all the things that adults either don't want to say because they have kind of had that socialization to say, oh, no, that's not something that I can talk about, or that's not something I can address. But kids are very curious. Kids will say they'll say what is on their mind, and they won't think twice about it. So that happened all the time to me. And my response, it hasn't changed, is I'm a girl, I just have short hair. And normally we're able to kind of continue. But lots of times there is confusion because we have kind of grown up with the idea that, women have long hair, and men have short hair. And that's kind of one of those physical identifiers, right? And that's what we kind of teach children. So when they see someone who is kind of not fully or is that challenging that stereotype, right? That women can have short hair, then that's where that confusion sets in. So that's not something I'm offended by. And again, I think not to speak for everyone with or all women with short hair, but I'm sure that's experiences that they also have, and not something that kind of ruins my day because that's not realistic. That's just, what happens, right? So when it comes to the importance of language, using those pronouns, using the people's chosen names, what they want to be named and what they want to be called by. And then obviously the difference between sex and gender. This has again gotten a lot more politicized over the years, but we do have, when you're kind of talking about gender within sociology, that was my background and what I studied in university. These are separate entities, right? You have gender, which kind of shows, how you present yourself. I have short hair. I will wear pants and blazer, versus sex. I am a woman, I have a uterus, I have XYZ. So these can be separate, these are separate things that impact, how they work with one another. But just reminding that I can I can present my identity in a different way than, what was assigned to me at birth. Inclusive terminology is another important one. It's kind of the things that you don't really think about, like saying girls and boys, saying bride and groom. That is something that happens all the time. I'm engaged, and when you kind of reach out to people for any kind of wedding stuff, right? They're like, "Oh, are you the bride? Are you the groom? Who's the bride?" Because we kind of have this expectation that all people who are, engaged and will be married have that kind of, there's one man and there's one woman. So we are constantly kind of challenging that stereotype and saying, oh, actually, we have two brides. This is how that kind of looks like, right? So it's all the little ways that you kind of don't even think about. using the phrase y'all. I use the phrase y'all all the time, just because I have family from the South and kind of grew up hearing it. But y'all can be a very inclusive term, right? You're not differentiating ladies and men or ladies and gentlemen. You're saying everyone, because there are people who don't align with the term lady or man. They fit either in between or on the outside. So having terminology that you can use that includes everyone that you're working with is also very important. I didn't kind of look up, but you could go through the rabbit hole of different terminologies that are a bit more expansive and include more people than kind of what we have kind of been conditioned to use in the previous. So moving forward, after the importance of language, is respect, another really important part. And I like to kind of talk about this because there are so many things to know, especially within, LGBTQIA, all of those, little what's the L stands for something, the G stands for something. Like there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to know. But I want to preface that you don't need to know everything. You don't need to know the history. You don't need to understand, why someone feels that they are trans or why someone may be queer, what that means to have that kind of very basic level of respect. And that's, I think, is why I have this in the middle. Because I think when we're talking about different terms, even, my fiance's father will ask us, what's the difference between, gay and queer? What's the difference between this and that? And of course we'll tell them. And he has the ability to ask people who are close in his life. But there are plenty of people who don't have, gay friends or, gay neighbors that they have this kind of comfort to where they can ask these different questions. But at the end of the day, there's so much information, so many names, so many acronyms that it's impossible to have the notion that you will be able to understand everything while also understanding everyone's, presentation. Like, why are they, wearing a skirt with short hair, or why are they doing this? Why are their nails painted? All these different things that there's no way for us to really know. So you don't fully need to comprehend this or the idea or someone's journey, someone's identity, their sexuality to be able to provide that kind of basic respect. The feeling, the understanding that someone or something is important, serious, and deserves appropriate treatment or regard. So this is what I really like to talk about, just because, again, there's people that I'll never be able to understand, even being in, the LGBTQ community together. And that's okay. I don't need to understand their journey, why they do what they do, but I can use, their correct pronouns, their chosen name, and stand up for them when I need to. So that, I think, is just an important kind of bullet. You don't have to understand someone or understand something completely to be able to stand beside them and support them through what they're going through. So, yeah, and I think, Lisa, when you had mentioned earlier, I'm coming across someone who I would expect someone to be a woman, to identify as a woman. They're dressed in, more feminine clothing. At the end of the day, their gender identity or their sexuality probably isn't vital information for you, right? You're not their doctor, you're not their lawyer, you're not their mother. So we have this expectation that, like, oh, I want to know. I'm so curious. I want to know. But at the end of the day, you don't need to know the details of their life to have a successful interaction with them, right? And I think that's something to remember is humans are really curious. Like I said, kids they'll ask me, are you a girl or a boy? And I'll tell them. I have no issues telling them. But at the end of the day, that's not going to impact, how we program with these kids, how successful or not successful as leading them on a hike. That identity of me and how I present myself doesn't impact, the quality of the work that I do. And of course, humans are curious and we're going to want to know. But sometimes you just got to stay curious. And that's that. So yes, moving on, this last motion or this last kind of point is ditching the minority tax. So I have been in kind of staff meetings when June rolls around. And for those who are unfamiliar with the month of June, it is Pride Month. So it celebrates, LGBTQ people and the community and kind of recognizing the work that previous trans women of color have done to kind of help provide the rights that people have now. Um, the Rainbow Month, for those who are also unfamiliar. And we wanted to, in this staff meeting, wanted to kind of highlight Pride Month. We wanted to, make some sort of statement, make some sort of post. This has gotten very popular. It's not as popular now. Some corporations will, change their logo for the month. But my team was kind of curious about this. Um, and one of the women's kind of looks at me and was like, Logan, what are we gonna do for Pride Month? Do you just can I just have a photo of you and your partner? And then we can just put that up on the socials. And I think that when you're kind of talking about a minority group and you have someone who has that minority identity, it's really easy to kind of place that conversation on them. And I think when it comes to kind of ditching this minority tax, and I want to distinguish involving a minority in a conversation about them and putting the responsibility and all of the work on that person. So that is the kind of term minority tax that has been kind of coined, is the tax that minorities are given to either do the work, be the token spokesperson, answer all the questions, do all the things, represent our organization under this identity, oh, you're Black, it's February, like let's get you on the socials, right? In reality, we should not be assigning additional work to train or educate our colleagues that have this identity. It's not their responsibility to educate us on their history, on their experiences, on their identity. And of course, there are people like myself. I'm happy to answer questions. I am happy to share any information, especially when kind of comes to awkward questions that, again, you don't really know who to ask. But that is myself. And placing that responsibility on everyone else who have various kind of identities is not what we want to do. There are ways to involve people without putting all of the work and responsibility on them. And that's also, and I should kind of asterisk that on the fact of if they want to be involved, right? There are ways to, offer involvement in a conversation, in a project, without automatically kind of assigning, oh, you're the lead person. You're going to be running this because you are the only one who has this viewpoint. And in replacement of that, I always, there are people everywhere who are paid for this work. And if you need something done for your organization and there is no one in your organization that can do that, you'll have to find the budget in the item line to appropriately pay someone for their work and their labor and their education. I feel like everyone is a consultant nowadays, and I'm sure there are about 5 lined up ready to take that work for you. So when we're looking at specifically like kind of diversity initiatives and work in the workplace, I really implore to make sure that if there is no one interested in your, organization, to find a professional who does that for a living, and who will do great work and be paid for it. Unfortunately, nonprofits and honestly corporations don't like to hear that. Especially at this moment where, different budgets have been cut and grants have been revoked. But to truly kind of celebrate whatever month or initiative that you are trying to really highlight, it is important to pay people for their labor, to pay people for their time. And professionals want to do this for you. So it's important to make sure that we're allocating the right resources to the right people. Um, so yes, when it came to conclude off my little personal story, we did not end up using a photo of me and my girlfriend on the water, because that has nothing to do with our organization, other than the fact that, I'm a staff person at that moment. Um, in the end, we were able to showcase one of the LGBTQ groups in the area and uplift them and give the spotlight to them rather than just this random gay couple. Because that's not doing anything. That's not really celebrating the month of June. That's just kind of putting the spotlight and trying to kind of tokenize one employee. And when I say this, I also want to address other identities, right? It's not just gay people, people of color exist, people with different ability levels, different disabilities, whether that be physical, mental. And yeah, there's so many little things when it comes to like what that minority tax could look like. Okie dokie. I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions on this particular slide or ideas, things that they want to add? Beautiful. Well, we'll move on. Okie dokie. So my last couple points that I want to kind of address, I think what's really important when we have these conversations is to also kind of provide some action items to the agenda and to the day. And when I say action items, I am focusing on allyship and advocacy. So allyship outside, inside, on the river, on the hiking path. And when I'm thinking of allyship, I'm talking about all the things that I just kind of previously spoke about. So using people's correct pronouns, correct names, and then everything beyond that, right? So supporting individuals as 2026 has come around. There have been a record number of anti-LGBTQ, a lot more anti-trans legislation that has been introduced to both the state and the federal level. And more, there has been a very large focus on, queer people and what they're doing with their time, what they're doing with their life. And when in reality, there's a lot of other things that we need to be focusing on. So when I talk about, queer allyship, I also talk about representation and how important representation is, making sure that we are voting, we're being active in our elections, we're being active citizens, we are interested in the candidates. Vote411.org. As you know, I know primaries are wrapping up, but as November comes around, the midterms will be here in 3 less than months. So knowing who's on your ballot. 411 is a lovely Vote 411 is ran by the League of Women Voters. They're nonpartisan. They are just going to provide the information about the candidates that are running in your area. And they even have a little mock ballot. So if if that's something that's kind of frightening to you, is getting to the ballot and not knowing what it's going to look like, 411 will be able to provide a ballot that is going to look very similar to what you're looking at, just to kind of you can even print it out. You can definitely print things out and bring them with you to the ballot. So don't forget about that resource if that's something that is kind of nerve-wracking. So of course legislative advocacy, while also day-to-day advocacy, as more and more people have again, what happens legislatively, I don't know if that's a word, kind of seeps into our social life, right? So as more and more things have kind of become um I don't even know, politicized. It can be a very scary space depending on what state you're in, depending on where you're in. Technically I'm in no state anymore. Fun fact, DC has no voting power. So which is super upsetting to no longer have federal representation. But growing up in Indiana, I was constantly aware of who I was with and who I am, or excuse me, who or where I was. My worst fear is rural gas stations, because that's a place where that is not some place where I want to be by myself. So knowing and having, being aware of your surroundings and also other people who may be sharing those surroundings that don't have that same sense of comfort. And that is including, people of color, not to bump to the next line, but intersectionality, the idea that multiple minorities can exist, right, and intersect with one another. So how, homophobia and racism kind of work together. Um, we can't talk about LGBTQ or queer advocacy without mentioning racial equity and racial advocacy, especially at a time where again things have gotten more politicized. And when you look at me, you may not know if I'm a boy or girl, but you're definitely going to see my skin color. So that is my first kind of layer, right? And then afterwards, you may be like, huh, I don't know what that is, but that's a white person, right? So there's layers to oppression and discrimination, and we really have to be mindful of these other kind of identities that people hold and how they intersect with one another. Um, because I know there are people who have similar experiences out on the water, out at the campground, even out in the park, who have darker skin than I do and who are not welcomed, right? Even we've had instances where some gentlemen can't even go on a run without kind of being stopped and asked, what are they doing? Why are they in this area? So there's so many levels of, how can we create a space where more people feel comfortable, not only being at our local parks, but also at our national parks. Whether that be, again, paddling on the river, to setting up your tents. So there are ways to kind of stand up for your neighbors and make sure that they feel comfortable. And if someone starts to instigate something or kind of involve themselves, it's important to stand up physically for them and be that barrier between them and whoever is trying to either interrogate or initiate that confrontation. Being a physical barrier is the best way to start while also trying to, this isn't a de-escalation training, but at least providing that barrier and separating someone who is looking for conflict and looking for, issues from that person who is being kind of picked on. It's all, very strategic, or not strategic, I should say. It's advanced bullying, right? So having that being that barrier and standing up for that person is just another way to kind of show allyship and physically be an ally. Um, so yeah, that is all I prepared. Within our last 10 minutes, I have this last kind of question of what was not discussed but should be. We all kind of come from our own areas. We have different identities, different experiences. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, is there something that I didn't kind of discuss when talking about, this kind of allyship or, equity in the workforce, that you either think you want to bring to the table, or kind of just like let us all be aware of?
Yeah, Logan, well, thank you. Thank you so much for this really frank discussion about things that I think, at least for me, answer questions or address issues that, go around in my head, but I won't articulate them because I don't have someone who I think I can have the conversation with. So Thanks for creating that. I'm going to go through a couple of RMS slides and I'll just open it up and stop sharing. And then if people have questions, so if you have questions, hang on to them for 1 sec. So first, thank you very much. And if people need your email address later, we'll definitely provide that. But thanks for being here. And for other folks, we'll have this up on our YouTube channel, on our website tomorrow, the next day. And we have a ton of events coming up. For anyone, you can learn how to make your will tomorrow for free because it's Make Your Will Month. And then we have a trip on the New River. We have a trip. We have a river management roundtable talking about accessibility, looking at a case study down in the Gila River, Verde River down there. Trip on the Allagash with Allagash Wilderness River, and then also Lower Salmon River trip. I think that might be full. So lots of trips this fall, thanks to our chapter leaders. We have, let's see, I'm going to put when I stop sharing, I'm going to put a survey link. Let's see. There we go. The super quick survey. I'm going to put that link in the chat when we're done. And then now I'm just going to unshare and I'm going to put that survey link in the chat. You could take 2 seconds, you guys, and fill that out. And then for others who are here, you want to just turn your camera on if it hasn't been on, or if you have questions, please don't hesitate. You might not in the near future, have someone who is able to kind of help talk about this topic as frank a manner as Logan has. So again, appreciate you so much, Logan. Any questions? Yeah, don't be shy. Don't be
Logan,
shy.
Logan, thanks so much for helping and for sharing this training today. I was lucky enough to go to school in Oregon, where we had a lot of the same at University of Oregon. We had a lot of the same training with our orientation and stuff like that. So I think it's really cool to like hear it again and to get it reiterated and hear a little bit different perspective. So I really enjoyed being able to come and listen.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I can't speak on the Oregon education system. I'm coming from Indiana, and it's probably not nearly as good. But that's great to hear that it was a nice refresher.
Yeah, it's just different, like because I've lived in a lot of places. I grew up in Southern Virginia, so very different, very different.
Okay, yeah.
And then lived
That does
in the
sound different.
DC area for a while, and I lived in the deep South for a while in Charleston. So every place has been a little bit different on how um, allyship looks and how you can, and like what is really possible or really easy. I guess it's
Mhm.
not supposed to be easy, but like, you know, where people
Attainable.
are seen. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Beautiful. Right, right.
I had a comment. I just wanted to say thank you for opening this space for this conversation. Pretty cool. And also thank you, Risa, for hosting this space. I had a comment on the pronouns since that topic came up. I just became a iNaturalist ambassador too, on top of being a
Congratulations.
river ambassador. So now I do a lot of different like bio blitzes, but I did one of my first official ones the other day, and I said my name and my pronouns, and I invited everybody in the group to say their pronouns too. And then, by the way, unrelated but still very much so related, I'm in Florida, and four people said their pronouns as different than what I had perceived by what they were wearing or by what they looked like. But when you lead a program, if you go first, it makes it less scary. I've found for other people to share their pronouns. And it was just a really cool group. Everybody, was respectful of those pronouns, and if they messed up, they were like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and nobody was angry, and nobody had flaming pitchforks, and it was all good. And then I also today, second story, didn't realize that like the pronouns after a name were so confusing for people. But I did have a quick story. I was a volunteer manager at a land management agency, And I had some volunteers reach out to me. It's a women couple, and they're in their 80s. And they were so excited. They called me and they said, "Hey, they're replacing you with another trans person." And I said, "Oh my gosh, how do you know?" And they said, "Oh, because she has she, her after her name." And so some people think
Definitely.
because you have your pronouns, it automatically makes you a trans person. So I had no idea. And so we laughed. But I'm so glad that I've opened that space for them to come to me too. And they say they learn something new every time they talk to me as well. Even though it's not up to me or Logan to carry the flag and tell people all this stuff all the time, it's nice when I can just like slow down and share that with people who would genuinely want to know. So yeah, I wanted to share that funny story because I'm like, no, it doesn't mean automatically that they're trans, but I had no
Wow.
idea how people
Right.
perceive the pronouns after a name.
Mhm.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that's one. Yeah, so many great things. One is, yes, starting with pronouns allows for people who maybe have pronouns that they're more self-conscious with to, provide those without that kind of fear of, oh, I'm going to out myself as the only person who's using different pronouns than what I look like. But also with what you had mentioned. Yeah, I think there has been this correlation, and of course you've seen this with people who kind of target people who use pronouns. It's like, oh, you're doing this to, make this a thing. Pronouns weren't a thing before you. It's like, well, they were, actually. But also, yeah, it has nothing to do with me being trans. This is actually, these are my pronouns, and this has something to do with, just how I want to be called. There just happens to be a lot of queer people, who are using pronouns, and I think that's definitely driving, that thought. But it's so funny, even women in their 80s who have been gay longer than I've been born, don't know all this, right? Because every year, not every year, but information comes very quickly and it can really, change in how, different phrases are used. I was trying to kind of put another diagram, but it wasn't going to look great. On like people who like the term cross-dressing was such a huge term in years and years and years ago. But that's not a term that we're going to use for people who wear clothing that doesn't identify with how they were assigned, right? So there's all these little terms and words that people, even queer people, queer women I know who are older, don't like the word queer because it used to be derogatory. And it used to be a slur that they used or that was used against them. So now they're, elders, LGBTQ elders that won't use that terminology because it was used with such hate when they were younger. So yeah, it's really interesting how different generations can kind of reclaim and different terminology. Like as you said, even women, again, been gayer than I am, don't know that. And that's okay, right? We're all here to, help each other out and learn and, be happy.
Well, and value created an environment where people were, encouraged to talk about it. So that's important, super important to
Definitely.
a lot of people are not outgoing enough to just say to launch into that kind of discussion. It's still hard.
Indiana trained me well. Don't worry.
Well, we're getting to I guess, the bottom of the hour, and I want to just thank you again, Logan, so much for attending, and other people, everybody else, all for attending and speaking, and yeah, if you have for the future, like we've said, if you have other suggestions for topics that you'd like to discuss, this is an unusual one, but really, really great. So really appreciate everybody being here, and we'll wrap, but we'll have a recording of this session up in a couple of days. And thank you, and we'll see you again. Logan, hope to see you here in
Of
DC.
course.
Take
Have a
care,
great evening.
everybody.
Bye.